Masechet Yevamot Daf Mem Het. The topic tonight is first, as a Canaanite slave who was free need to accept mitzvot. We're going to bring in the Yeshet Yefat To'ad as part of that discussion, and then continue a little bit more about the procedure of the captive woman. And then we're going to ask, can one keep a slave who is not willing to be circumcised? And we're going to end the daf and the sugya right before the next Mishnah with an Agadah about why converts also experience suffering along with those who are born Jewish. Okay, so we begin with the procedure of a Canaanite slave. When a Jew acquires a non-Jewish slave, then he undergoes Brit Milah, if it's a man, and Tevilah for the purpose of becoming an Eved. And that means that they would be required to do some mitzvot like women. But they are not yet Jewish. They can still not marry a Jew during that time period. The Gemara here is not going to be discussing acceptance of mitzvot at that point when they become a slave. The Gemara does not talk about that. That is a machloket between Rashi and Rambam. Rashi says that one can force the Canaanite slave to go and do mikveh and brit milah and accept the mitzvot. He's a slave, and so therefore this is part of the deal of being part of a Jewish household. It's not pretty, nothing about slavery is nice, but that's the deal. Can be forced. According to Rambam, however, even the Canaanite slave who is bought has to agree willingly to accept the mitzvot in order to become a Canaanite slave in the first place. Okay, so that's a very interesting machloket, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about at the end of the slave period, if the master should decide to free the Canaanite slave, in which case he or she would go to the mikveh again and now become a full Jew. Do they need to accept mitzvot at that point, or can they be forced to be freed and become Jewish? That is the question. And we begin the discussion with the Baraita that we saw in the previous stuff that said Echad ger v'echad eved mishuchra. The Baraita was talking about the whole procedure of a regular convert and said the very last thing he has to do is in front of a bet din will go to the mikveh and the bet din will ask them one more time, are you sure? Are you willing to keep all the mitzvot? And they accept upon themselves at that point and dunk, then they are fully Jewish. And the Braita added the words, not only for a convert, but also for a Canaanite slave who goes free, they also have to do that. Now, what is that? Right now, we're assuming that it means not only going into the mikveh a second time, but also that they have to willingly accept the yoke of the mitzvot at that point that they're freed. Okay, good. So now, according to the Baraita, a Canaanite slave who goes free must accept willingly the mitzvot and dunk to become fully Jewish. If it does not accept, then he does not become Jewish. That's what our Baraita says. Urmin hu, however, we have yet another Baraita that says, that we say only this, that one has to accept mitzvot, and right before they dunk, only regarding a convert. But if someone was already a Canaanite slave and now is being freed, they do not need to accept the mitzvot. So we have a contradiction between two Baraitot. And so we're going to resolve it by saying these are two different authors. Amar Rav Shashat. All this is Rav Shashat's answer. We're going to see another answer soon. La Kashya had Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar had Rabbanan. These are two different authors. The one that's lenient and says you can force lenient for the owner, not so good for the slave. But the one who says, yes, it can be forced, does not have to accept. That would be the second Baraita, is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, whereas our Baraita that says he has to accept it is the opinion of Rabbanan. And how do we know that? Well, we're going to compare a freed slave to Eshet Yefat To'ar, one who goes to battle and finds a beautiful woman, and the soldier wants to take her. There's a whole procedure in Sefer Devarim, Detanya, Ubachetat, Abiyah ve'et imaha. Let's look at the Pisukim, because we're going to go into this in an extended way. So, V'ra'ita b'shivya, if someone finds among the captives, Eshet Yafator, a beautiful Mechashak Taba, and he desires her, V'lakachta lisha, and he wants to take her as a wife, but she is from a foreign country. So you bring Siporneha, you bring her into your house, and she cuts her hair or shaves her head, and she does her nails. We're going to talk about what that means, does her nails. Does that mean make them nice or make them grow long? And she waits 30 days during which she cries over her mother and father. She's leaving their house and now coming to this new home. And only after this procedure, then she can be your wife. Good. So this is in some ways similar, because it's kind of forcing this captive woman, I imagine she doesn't want to be captive, and bring her into a Jewish home as a wife. So this is something similar to a conversion after slavery. So, and there it says, Rabbanan there say that this whole procedure only applies where she did not accept it upon herself. But if she accepted willingly, then she goes to the mikveh and she is permitted immediately. So this is the opinion of Rabbanan, and it says that the whole procedure listed in Torah of waiting 30 days is only in a case where she is not willing. So then she's a captive, one can force her through this process. But if she willingly accepts the misvot, then she can go through a regular conversion process, and she is permitted right away. So what we see from here is that she is a captive, so she's kind of like a slave, but yet she has to willingly agree to accept the misvot in order to convert totally. If not, then you have to go through the process. Okay, so according to Rabbanan, a Yeshet Yefatohad has to accept the misvot agreeably, if she doesn't want to go through the regular process, and therefore, by analogy, an Eved Canaanite who goes free also has to agreeably accept the mitzvot in order to then become fully Jewish. Otherwise, they do not. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, but that same Baraita has another opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, "Afa pi shelo kibela aleha kofeh umatpila l'shem shivchut vechozer umatpila l'shem shichrur umeshachrera." It says even if she does not accept upon herself willingly, let's say the guy who doesn't want to wait the 30 days and go through this whole process, he can do another route. He can force her to become a shivcha Canaanite and go to the mikveh to become a slave, and then go ahead and free her and have her go to the mikveh again in order to become freed. And then once she becomes freed, umutar ba miyad, and then he can go and marry her immediately. Now, of course, now she's fully Jewish. Now the other question is she going to want to marry him? Because once she's fully Jewish, she has to agree to Kiddushin. So after he just forced her to dunk twice and accept the mitzvot, is she going to now want to love him and marry him? Maybe, maybe not. That's a separate story. But the point is that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that one can do a forcible procedure of conversion after the person is an Eved Canaani. Sounds like you're forcing them also to become an Eved Canaani in the first place and accept misvot. Okay, and so therefore this is an alternate route that you can use if you don't want to wait the 30 days. But only Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says you can do this. So he is the author of the opinion that says, the second Baraita that says you do not have to wait. You do not have to get her agreement, right? Be'eved mishuchrad en tzarich lekabel. She does not have to agree to the misvot. But the Rabbanan in this Braita regarding Eshet Yefator do not say what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says. They say no, you have to be in agreement, and therefore they would be the author of our Braita from the previous stuff, who say that the Eved does in fact have to agree. Okay, good. So now that we have both of these opinions, we ask, Amar Rava, my Ta'ama de Rabbi Shimon, right? If we ask, what is the source for Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that you can force a slave to accept the misvot upon being freed? My Ta'ama de Rabbi Shimon Elazar, dichtiv, kol ebed ish miknat kasef umalata oto az yochal bo. This is in the context of Shemot Perek Yud Bet, of eating Korban Pesach, and it says any slave of a person who was purchased, if you do Brit Milah on him, then he can eat. There's a good question of who's the he can eat. Is it the slave or the owner? The rabbis say the owner has to make sure to circumcise all of his slaves before the owner can eat Korban Pesach. Okay, in any case, we have an extra word here. Kol Eved. Why do you need ish? Kol Eved miknat kasef. Any Eved who was bought with money. What is the meaning of ish here? So we ask, Eved ish velo Eved isha, does it mean only a slave owned by a male, but not by a female? Women can also own slaves, so then would it be a different law? That doesn't make sense. Ela Eved isha tamal be'al korcho, ve'i tamal ben ish be'al korcho. Rather, the word ish comes to mean, it means an adult, someone who was responsible for his decisions, and it teaches that Eved Ish, someone who normally is responsible for his decisions, and therefore we have to get their agreement, but in this case, because he is an Eved and also an Ish, you can circumcise him even against his will. Whereas, Tamal, but if he's Ben Ish, if he's just the son of a person, a man who's not Jewish, and not a servant, then one cannot force him. So a free person cannot be forced, but a slave can be forced, and that is the source for the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now we ask, V'Rabbanan, how about the rabbis? What do they do with that pasuk? Amar Ula, keshem she'ata mal ben ish ba'al korcho, kach i'ata mal me'eved ish ba'al korcho. So no, I could say the opposite. Just like you cannot force an adult male against his will to accept mitzvot, so too, you cannot forcibly do circumcision to a servant against his will and make him accept the mitzvot. Okay, kol ebed ish. But it says kol ebed ish. So what does that come to include? Oh, we need these extra words here, kol and ish, to come to include a different halacha that Shemuel teaches. Damar Shemuel. Hamafkir abdo yasa lecharut ven tzarich get shichrur. If someone wants to let his slave go free and just says, this slave is hefker, because one owns a slave, he owns the body of the slave, so just like any property, one can say, I renounce ownership of it. Shemuel says, that's all you have to do, just renounce ownership, and then he goes free. And you don't have to write a document of emancipation. There's a machloket about this. There's another opinion that says, no, you also have to write this. Shemuel says, no. How does he know? כשנאמר כל עבד איש מקנת כסף, עבד איש ולא עבד אישה, אלא עבד שיש לו רשות לרבו עליו, קרוי עבד, ושאין רשות לרבו עליו, אין קרוי עבד. Rather, he learns it from this very pasuk, that a servant of a person who is bought with money. So now, why does it say Eved Ish? Does that mean, the same question, only a male or not a female, owned by a male, not owned by a female? That wouldn't make sense. But rather, Eved Sheyesh Lo Reshut, if the owner has possession of the servant, then it's called an Eved. Eved, who also you own his personhood. She'en Lo Reshut Rabo, but that if the owner does not own him because he renounced ownership, then he is no longer Eved. He has to be Eved Ish. And so that's what he learns from this pasuk, something completely different, not related to the acceptance of mitzvot or forcibly giving him Brit Milah. By the way, this seems to be talking about giving him Brit Milah at the beginning of his servitude. And according to this, is discussing whether that could be forced or not. But yet we're still making an analogy here to the end of servitude and the going to the mikveh a second time. And so we see the source for the two opinions. Okay, now Matkifla Rav Papa. Rav Papa is going to object to Rav Sheshat's answer, who says that these are talking about both B'raitat are talking about two different opinions. And how do we know that? By comparison to Eshet Yefat Toar. He says, no, you're comparing two very different cases. Maybe the Rabbanan, who said you cannot force an Eshet Yefat Toar to take her and convert her on purpose without her accepting mitzvot. maybe they would say that regarding Eshet Yafatot, because she was never under the obligation for mitzvot, right? She was just a part of a non-Jewish nation, and then all of a sudden she's taken captive. She never agreed to mitzvot at any point, and so maybe in that case she has to agree in order to jumpstart the program if you want to save the 30 days. But for a Canaanite slave where he was already obligated in mitzvot while he was a slave, he wasn't Jewish yet, but he was already within the realm. So therefore, in that case, maybe the rabbis might very well agree that Eved Kanani, since he already was doing mitzvot, once he's freed, he can be forced to accept upon himself now all the mitzvot as a full Jew, because he's already there, and so therefore don't compare it with Eshet Yafat To'ar. De Tanya, and we have a braita that backs us up. Echad ger ve'echad lokech eved min hagoy sarich lekabel, halokech misrael en sarich lekabel. And this braita teaches that a convert or someone who acquires a non-Jewish slave from a non-Jew, in which case they never accepted mitzvot before, they were owned by a non-Jew. In that case, both of these have to accept the mitzvot. But that means that if one acquired it from they have to accept mitzvot to become a slave in the first place, in that case. But if he acquired it from a Yisrael, then he does not have to accept mitzvot, because this slave was already owned by a Jew and already accepted mitzvot beforehand when that Jew acquired him. So since he was already there accepting mitzvot, then when the second Jew acquires him, he doesn't have to accept it again. And when he frees him, he doesn't have to willingly accept mitzvot either, because he's already under the obligation. Now this baraita, who is the author of it? Whose opinion would it follow? It can't be Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, because he says even if you acquire a non-Jew from a convert from a non-Jew, you can forcibly convert them at the beginning and at the end. According to the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, sounds like, right, you don't need agreement at any point during the process. Okay, this is independent of the machloket Rashi and Rambam, who will follow Rabbanan. So this can't be his opinion. Ela lav Rabbanan ushma minado lokach min hagoy sarich lekabel, aval lokach misrael en sarich lekabel. And so we see, according to Rabbanan, only if one acquires from a non-Jew, in which case he's just freshly a non-Jew, he had never accepted mitzvot, then he has to accept it willingly. But if one acquired it from a Jew, then he does not have to accept it. Not when the second Jew acquires it, because he's already accepted it, and therefore it makes sense not when he frees this Canaanite slave, because he already accepted the mitzvot willingly at the beginning of it, at least according to Rambam, and therefore he does not have to accept it willingly at the end when he's freed. And so therefore even Rabbanan may very well agree that one can free a slave, and he's forced to accept the mitzvot. Okay, ve'ela kasha had ger ve'chad eved meshuchrar ki tanya hi lenyan tevila tanya. Okay, now back to our original question. According to Yudav Papa, where you say that Rabbanan agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and both of them say that you can forcibly cause the slave who goes free to accept mitzvot, then what about the original question we had, that there's two baraitot, and our baraita from the previous daf seems to indicate that yes, they have to accept upon themselves the mitzvot willingly. I'll answer that baraita when it says v'chen le'inyan, it was only regarding the tevilah, that just like a regular convert, the last thing he does is he has to go to the mikveh. So too, a Canaanite slave who goes free, also the last thing he has to do is do tevilah. But it was not comparing it to also the acceptance of a mitzvot. Only a regular convert have to accept a mitzvot right at that moment before he dunks, but an Eved Meshuchrar does not have to accept mitzvot right before he dunks. The acceptance of mitzvot was already done at the beginning of becoming a servant. And there you go. So that's the second answer of Rav Papa. All right, now that we did bring in the case of Eshet Yefat Toar, let's discuss that a little bit more. Tenora Banan. Gilecha et roshav asetat siporneha. Rabbi Eliezer omer takos. Rabbi Akiva omer tagdil. What exactly does it mean that she does her nails? Rabbi Eliezer means she cuts her nails, and Rabbi Akiva says she lets them grow in an ugly way. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I think it means that you have to remove them because it's a parallel. Just like the pasuk says, you do something with your hair, and that means that she cuts her hair. So too, it will be the same thing regarding nails. She would cut her nails. Remove them. Rabbi Akiva Omer ne'emar asiya barosh ne'emar asiya basipor ne'emar lalan nivul afkan nivul. Rabbi Akiva says, I agree that we should compare them, but the comparison is a bit different. What do you do with your head? By shaving her hair, she is making herself repulsive. So too with nails, you have to do something that makes her repulsive to him. So the idea is that maybe now he'll change his mind, because we really would prefer that he didn't go and take this foreign wife, bring her home. And so therefore, she has to look repulsive to him. And so growing the nails long, that will be repulsive. So it is parallel, but both have to do with repulsive and not with removing. Okay. We have a proof for Rabbi Eliezer that it means cutting the nails. It says, Mefiboshet ben Shaul yarad likrat hamelech lo asa raglav velo asa sefamo. When Mefiboshet came to meet Shaul, he wanted to show how depressed and in mourning he was. And so he did not do his feet, meaning he did not cut his toenails, and he did not trim his mustache. And so my asiha havara. So it says the word asa, to do toenails here, means he did not cut his toenails. So to do the toenails, regarding sotah, where it says she must do them, means that she must cut her nails. Okay, so that's a pretty good textual proof, the exact same verb in a different context. Tenora banan ubachetat avia ve'et imaha. Furthermore, she has to cry over her father and mother for a month. Rabbi Eliezer met avia avia mamash imaha mamash. Rabbi Eliezer takes it at face value. Means that she's leaving her father and mother's house to go to live in a new country with this soldier. So she wants to cry over and mourn that she's not going to see them. Probably again. Rabbi Akiva Omer Aviha ve'imah zo avodah zara v'chen Omer omrim la'es avi ata ve'gomer. So Rabbi Akiva takes it more metaphorically, and so she has to cry over her idols that she once worshipped, and now she's going to become Jewish and no longer will be able to worship the idols. As it says regarding Yirmiyahu, is making fun of idolaters. They go to a tree and say, "You are my father." So that's what it means. It means they're metaphorical idolatrous parents. Good. Yerach yamim, yerach shedoshim yom. How long does she have to do that for? Yerach means a month. So that's 30 days. That's the majority opinion. But Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, same Tana that we had above, Omer tish'im yom, no, 90 days. Yerach sheloshim yamim sheloshim v'achar ken sheloshim, because he's going to use every word in this pasuk, right? Why does it have to say yerach yamim v'achar kach? If you have to say yerach, and then I know it's a month, I know how many days that is. I don't have to say and after that. So rather v'achar ken. Rather, each of these phrases means another period, like the yerach, more yamim, another 30. Achar ken is another 30, 90 days altogether. This might be connected with the previous thing that he said, that you can forcibly cause her to convert by making her into a shifcha Canaanite and then freeing her. So it makes more sense that Rabbi Shimon would have, Ben Elazar would have a need to do this forcibly, because otherwise according to him, you have to wait 90 days. Matkif la Ravina. Ravina, however, says, no, it doesn't make sense. Ema yerach sheloshim yamim sheloshim v'achar ken ki haneh ki kashya. If you're saying that, each word adds to the one before, how do you know it adds the same amount? Maybe yerach means 30, yamim means 30, and then achar ken means the same amount, and then it means another 60 days and 120. And so your interpretation is too ambiguous, that to be specified that it's only 90, and therefore This is the difficulty of that interpretation. Okay, Tenorabanan mekaymin avadim she'enam malin. So we completed the first two topics, and now about a slave who does not want to be circumcised in the first place. So we already talked about them accepting upon mitzvot at the end, but can they be forced to be circumcised to begin with? Tenorabanan mekaymin avadim she'enam malin. Divrei Bishmael. Bishmael says yes. If they don't want to be circumcised, so then, okay, so they won't be, and you can still keep them as slaves. Rabbi Akiva Omer, and Mekayamin. Rabbi Akiva says, no, they're part of your household, and therefore everybody in the household has to be circumcised. You cannot keep them. You have to go and you can sell them back. Amar le Rabbi Yishmael, Areho Omer, V'nafesh ben amatecha. Pasuk is talking about Shabbat, Sheshet Yamim, Ta'aseh Ma'asecha, B'yom Shish Tishpot, Leman Yanuach Shorecha, V'chamorecha, V'nafesh ben amatecha ve'hager. So since the Pasuk says that for 6 days you work, not only you have to rest, but also one's animals and also amatecha. The Gemara in the next paragraph will explain why a ben amatecha means someone who is not circumcised. A simple reading might just be that it's not talking about the Eved or Shivcha herself, but the son of a Shivcha. So this son who's there also cannot work. Well, the son was not acquired as a servant, so who says that this child was ever circumcised? But yet they also have to rest. So that means they can continue to be a servant even though they did not have circumcision. So that's the source for Rabbi Ishmael. And so Rabbi Akiva, what are you going to do about that? Rabbi Akiva apparently does agree that ben amatecha does mean someone's not circumcised. So what is he doing being a slave? Amar le belokech eved ben hashemashot velo espik lemulo hakatuv medaber. Rabbi Akiva said, oh, this pasuk is talking about a case where the Jew acquired this non-Jewish slave on Friday afternoon, and he didn't get a chance to do Brit Milah. On that Shabbat, he has to also rest. But of course, he can't keep him there for long term. After Shabbat, right, next week, he's going to have to do circumcision. So for Rabbi Akiva, this whole pasuk is just for that one little case. Okay, this seems to be quite a push that this whole pasuk is talking about one case, and we're going to offer two other possibilities for Rabbi Akiva in addition to this one. All right, so now we know their source. Let's analyze how they actually derived it. According to both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, they both say that ben amatecha refers to a slave who is not circumcised. Well, how does this pasuk mean that? Detanya ve'i nafesh ben amatecha. So there's a midrash that says, yes, this is talking about a servant who is not circumcised. And then the midrash asks itself rhetorically, how do you know that? Maybe it means Eved who is circumcised. Oh, there's another pasuk in Sefer Dvarim, in the version of the Ten Commandments there, that has the same content. Don't do melacha, ata ubincha ubitecha v'abdecha v'amatecha. So no one can do work. And so there also it talks about amatecha. So that must be talking about a servant who is circumcised. So why do I need another pasuk in Shemot to tell me the same thing? It must be referring to yet another case, which is a circumcised servant. So there you go. That's the source text for the Bishmael. Is clear. Rabbi Akiva has to say, yeah, it's true, but it's only talking about this one case that he didn't get a chance on Friday afternoon to circumcise him. Ve'hager. Now we recorded this pasuk from Shemot that also says v'nafesh ben amatecha ve'hager. What does that come to include? What kind of ger is that? Ger toshav. So this is talking about an immigrant. This ger sedek means someone who fully converts and then becomes fully Jewish. But ger means someone who's from a foreign nation that comes to live permanently in the land of Israel, but it is not converting. In the Peshat of Pisukim, looks like it never says ger sedek. So it looks like almost all the references are to a ger toshav, because once he converts, then he would be an Israelite. But nevertheless, the rabbis have this category of ger toshav. There's a huge machloket about what does a ger toshav need to do in order to have the status of ger toshav. Is it the shev mitzvot ben hanoach? Some say more than that, some say less than that. Okay, in any case, when it says the ger also for sure cannot work on Shabbat. But then the Midrash asks itself again rhetorically, well, how do you know this is an immigrant? Maybe it's actually a convert. No, we have the other pasuk in Sefer Devarim in the Ten Commandments there, where it says, and also the convert that's within your gates. So that is a full convert. So what is the word ger in Shemot mean? That's talking about a ger toshav, someone who immigrates but does not convert. So they also cannot work on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halokech eved min hagoy velo rasa lamol megalgel imo ad shenem asar chodesh lomal hozer umochro legoyim. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi has seemingly yet another opinion about this, that one who acquires a slave from a non-Jew and he does not want to be circumcised, so you can't force him to be circumcised, but you can keep him for 12 months, and while during that time, you will continue to convince him, right? And say, hey, you know, it's a good deal. Come, be part of the Jewish nation, circumcised. You can have Korban Pesach, so on. And so we have the 12-month waiting period. If he still doesn't agree after 12 months, then you have to sell him back to a non-Jew, and you cannot keep him. Okay. Amaru harabanan kamed Rab Papa. So the rabbis repeated this opinion in front of Rab Papa. They said, Keman, delok Rabbi Akiva, di Rabbi Akiva hamar en mekayemin. And so Rab Papa said, whose opinion is this? It can't be, they asked Rab Papa, whose opinion is this? It can't be Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva said, you cannot keep a slave who's not circumcised at all, right? I mean, he did say for one day until after Shabbat, but that's it. You can't keep him for 12 months. So whose opinion is it? It's hard to say it's Rabbi Ishmael either, because Rabbi Ishmael says you can keep him forever. So what is it? No, in fact, it can be Rabbi Akiva. So he says maybe Rabbi Akiva only said you cannot keep him if he explicitly said, I do not want circumcision. And then you cannot keep him at all. But if he didn't make his refusal explicit, and he's like quiet, he's like indicating, maybe I will, maybe I won't, and he didn't say no, then you can keep him for 12 months until one's able to convince him. And so, really, in fact, this can be reconciled with Rabbi Akiva. If he says no, you have to sell him back right away. If he doesn't say anything, then wait and see for 12 months. If still he doesn't say yes, then you have to resell him. Amar Rav Kahana, Amrita Lishmata Kamed Rav Zevid Medehada'a. Now the same statement of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was again taught. Rav Kahana says, I repeated it in front of Rav Zevid in the city of Nehada. Amar li ihachi ki amar le Rabbi Akiva belokech eved ben hashemashot lishni leha. Rav Zevid asked a question. This is according to this, if in fact it is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, as Rab Papa said, well then I have a question. Because when we said up above that what was Rabbi Akiva going to do with that pasuk in Shemot, and we answered that, it means that he acquired it on Friday afternoon and didn't get a chance to do Brit Milah, and that's what he does with that pasuk. Well, you didn't have to have such a forced reading of the pasuk. You could have said a simpler answer that is talking about this very case where he didn't say explicitly that he doesn't want to, and he has a waiting period of 12 months. And that's what the pasuk is talking about when it says that there is such a thing as v'nafesh ben amatecha. And that refers to an eved who is not circumcised. Well, how could you have an eved that's not circumcised if you're not allowed to? Could be for those 12 months, and you don't have to say it's only for that short period of over Shabbat. And so we answer, you know what? You're right. That was only one of two answers, and this is a good answer also. So Rabbi Akiva can interpret that pasuk in either of these ways. All right, good. Now, more about this statement, this topic. Shalach Ravin mishemeh de Rabbi Eli, v'chol rabotai ameru li mishemo, ezehu abed arel shemutar lekayemo, ze shelekacho rabo amenat shelo lemu. Ravin lived in Eretz Yisrael, and often he would travel to Bavel and bring Israeli traditions, but also sometimes he would send them with others, maybe in a letter. So Ravin sent in the name the following message in the name of Rabbi Eli, and all the rabbis also said it in his name. And here his chidush was, what does it mean an eved arel? Where can you find a slave who is not circumcised and one is allowed to continue owning him? Well, that's if the master acquired him on condition. You said on condition, listen, I'm acquiring you, but you're not going to be circumcised. If you made that condition at the onset, then one can keep such a slave. Now, who is the opinion? Who is the author? Whose opinion does this follow? So the rabbis repeated this also to Rav Papa, and he said, "Kiman Rabbi Akiva." They asked him, "Whose opinion is this? It can't be Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Hamad and Mekayamin." Rabbi Akiva seemed to make a blanket statement and said, "One can never keep a slave who is not circumcised." But no, I can explain that even Rabbi Akiva would agree to this. When Rabbi Akiva says one cannot keep a slave who is not circumcised, that was when you did not make a condition. But if you did make a condition, then everyone was agreeable to it, then you can, in fact, keep him. And so this could be Rabbi Akiva. Good. Amar Rav Kahana, Amri Tal Shmata Kemed Rav Zevid Min Dehar De'ah. This is a repetition of the we just saw regarding if he says explicitly, I don't want to be. So here also, Rav Kahana says the same thing, repeated this condition of Rav Papa to Rav Zevid. And Amar Li, Rav Zevid said, Hi hachi ki Amar Le Rabbi Akiva belokeach eved ben hashemashot. And Rav Zevid said, if this is true, that Rabbi Akiva allows one to keep a slave who was uncircumcised as long as you made a condition, then he should have used this to explain the pasuk back in Sefer Shemot that referred to a case of someone who's not circumcised and remains a slave. And he didn't have to say this difficult case of when he acquired him Friday night, and didn't get a chance to serve him. So that's what he said. Now, v'litamich lishni lehach. The Gemara now inserts its own question on Rav Zevid's question. It says, okay, besides your case where he made a condition, we already actually answered this in the previous paragraph, where we said, oh, Rabbi Akiva could be talking about a case where the Eved did not explicitly say, no, he doesn't want to. So, in fact, in any case, we already had an answer to this question. All right, we resolved both questions by saying, Ela had mitere utela tame ka'amar. In fact, Rabbi Akiva went all the way above when he said, it could be talking about a case of when he acquired the slave on Friday afternoon. That was one of actually 2 or even 3 possibilities that he could have said. He could have said either of these. All right. So you see actually the multiple layers here of various questions. It looks like this conversation with Rav Papa, and then the conversation about that with Rav Kahana probably was said by one or the other of these 2 situations. But then since there's like 2 versions, it's almost like an Ika de Amre, another version of the sugya, but now they're placed not with the Ikad Amreh, but rather back to back. So both happened. So now that you have both, now it's a question of, well, why do you need both answers? And so our final answer of the final layer is that, yeah, Rabbi Akiva could have said either one of these, and so there are multiple answers to the way he can explain the pasuk in Shemot. Okay, good. Yatev Rabbi Chanina bar Papi Rabbi Ameh. Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha, Akil'ad, Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha. These 3 sages were all sitting together at the courtyard of one of them, Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha. And they were talking about the following case. There was an actual case of a city in Israel where they had some servants that they bought, but the servants did not want to get circumcised. circumcised. And so they kept them for 12 months, and a waiting period, saying maybe they would change their mind and agree. But in the end, they did not agree, so they sold them back to non-Jews. Now, Keman, according to whose opinion were they following? Kihatana, according to the following Baraita de Tanya. הלוקח עבד מן הגוי ולא רצה למול מגלגל עמו עד 12 חודש לומר חוזר ומוכרו לגויים. So the Tanakama of this Baraita says someone who acquires servants and they do not want to get circumcised, so then you abide with them for 12 months, and if they don't, then you go and sell them to goyim. So he's following this Tana. Okay, even though just above we said that this opinion could possibly agree with Rabbi Akiva, but it's a little hard to push Rabbi Akiva into this. So, and the end here, we don't say it's Rabbi Akiva. It's whoever is the author of this Baraita says this explicitly. So there you go. Even though it was only the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who was an Amorah before, now we see it is also a Tana. That is Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar omer en mashin oto be'eretz Yisrael mipnei hefsed teharot. Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar agrees in principle that you have to, you cannot keep him, but he says something further. When you sell him, you cannot leave him in the land of Israel because he is tameh, as non-Jews are considered tameh, and then if he's in Israel, he might see some tirumah, touch the tirumah, and at least rabbinically it will become tameh, and so therefore sell him back outside the country. And furthermore, if it happens to be in a city that is close to the border, then you can't leave him there at all. I mean, we already said you can't leave him there, but this is like, not even for any time period. It's very important, and this would be for security reasons. Shema yishma davar v'yadech v'yomar lechavero goy. See, this person, you refused to circumcise, you refused to become part of the Israelite nation, and therefore we cannot be sure of their loyalty, and maybe they'll hear something negative, and they'll go and tell their someone else, and they could be a spy. So therefore, on a border city, you have to be worried that they might be a spy. All right. Tanya, Rabbi Chananya beno shel Rabban Gamliel omer, mipnei ma gerim bezman hazeh me'onin. We now get to the last topic of an Agadah about the suffering of converts. I mean, we just had a long few dapim about this topic, and so it's nice that it ends on an Agadah. And the question is, how come converts nowadays, they're under Roman times, are also suffer? The question seems to be, we understand why Jews suffer. Maybe it's because of our sins, and if not our sins, sins of our forefathers, that we are still suffering. There is such a concept as that. But this convert, he just came, and he didn't do anything wrong yet. So what does the convert deserve to have suffering? Oh, here's an answer, a few answers. One is that maybe even while they were not Jewish, they were required to follow the 7 Noahide commandments, and they did not. So they also have sins of their previous sins and sins of their forefathers. Okay, Rabbi Yosef Omer, says, no, they can't be, because a convert is like a newborn baby. And so anything they did in the previously, before they converted, is not considered anything. They are not responsible for that. They start with a clean slate. Rather, different reasons, because they're not well versed about the details of mitzvot. Someone who's born Jewish, he's part of the Jewish community, sees his parents, grandparents, he grows up with it, and he studies, so then he knows. But someone who is a new convert, even if they study, that's impossible for them to get all the details in a short time. They're always seeing new things, and therefore they're making mistakes, and that's why the suffering comes upon them. Abba Hanan Amar Omer, Mishum Rabbi Elazar Lefisha Nosim Mehava Elamir. Abba Hanan says no, it's because the convert is doing mitzvot not out of love, but rather out of fear. Meaning he's coming. Remember we tell him, if you do it, you get reward. If not, there's punishment. So he has that in mind. He listened to the lesson, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to do mitzvot because I want to get reward." He's only not do it because he's afraid of punishment. Now, I mean, it's interesting. He did convert in the first place, so he did convert willingly. But nevertheless, despite that willing conversion in the beginning, maybe what's keeping him going is the fear, and therefore that's not the best reason to do mitzvot. Acharim omerim mipnei sheshihu atzmam likanes tachat kanfei shechina. Another opinion is from a different direction altogether. It's because they waited so long to convert, right? What were you waiting for? Okay, so this can't mean that the whole time since they were 13, they were supposed to convert. They didn't think about it before. Maybe they didn't know about Judaism. So I mean, it must be talking about from the time that they decide that I'm going to convert. Then they should go ahead and do it right away, and they shouldn't wait any time from the time that they decide and they're accepted by the Beit Din. He shouldn't say, let me wait a few months to get in a few last cheeseburgers while I can, right? So if they delay it, then that would be the suffering would come because of that. How do we know what's a pasuk that supports this? Yeshalem Adonai pa'olech uti maskurtech shelema me'im Adonai Elohei sel Shabbat echasot tachat kenafa vegomer. This is what Boaz tells Ruth, and says Hashem should give you reward, and may your reward be complete from Hashem. Asherbat lachasot, that you came, and we can imply from the bat is that she did so enthusiastically and did not push it off, did not wait. In fact, she did a lot of actions to hurry it up and make sure to come and join the nation as quickly as possible, and therefore she gets full reward, and she would not deserve that punishment that others might if they delayed. So we end on this really very beautiful, positive note about converts, although there are some negative statements and trust issues and motivation issues, and we have to take all that into account. But the bottom line is, when someone does come and accept Judaism enthusiastically and fully, willingly comes and accepts puts themselves under the wings of the Shekhinah, then this is a beautiful thing that we compare to Ruth herself. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen v'Amen.